Millionaire car dealership owner sees his guards kick out quintuplets selling toys for medicine. When he finds out why, he turns pale. Before we dive in, tell me where you're watching from. It always makes my day to read your comments. From the vast window of his penthouse office, Daniel Morgan gazed down at the bustling city that had become the landscape of his success. At 45, the CEO of Morgan Motors had everything money could buy: a luxury car empire, a mansion that graced architectural magazines, and the respect of business titans worldwide. Yet, as he stood there, watching snowflakes dance against the darkening winter sky, an emptiness echoed through his carefully constructed world. His contemplation was interrupted by commotion at the main entrance below. Daniel's eyes narrowed as he spotted Frank, his head of security, confronting 5 small figures at the dealership entrance. Even from this height, something about the children's determined stance caught his attention. They weren't dispersing, despite Frank's intimidating presence. "What is it about those kids?" Daniel muttered, reaching for his phone to call down to security. Frank answered immediately. "Sorry for the disturbance, Mr. Morgan. Just some persistent children trying to sell toys in front of the showroom. I've asked them to leave several times, but they keep coming back." "Don't send them away yet," Daniel found himself saying, surprising even himself. "I'll come down." The elevator descended silently, giving Daniel moments to question his unusual interest. Perhaps it was something in their posture, the way they stood together against the cold and rejection, that stirred something long buried within him. When the elevator doors opened to the gleaming showroom floor, Daniel strode past million-dollar vehicles toward the front entrance. Through the glass doors, he could see the 5 children huddled together against the biting wind. As he pushed through the doors, the frigid December air sliced through his tailored suit. "Mr. Morgan, you didn't need to come down yourself," Frank started, clearly confused by his boss's personal intervention. Daniel waved him off, focusing instead on the children before him. 5 identical faces looked up at him with a mixture of apprehension and hope. They appeared to be around 10 years old, each bearing the same striking features: warm brown eyes, caramel-colored hair, and determination etched in their expressions. "I hear you've been trying to sell something," Daniel said, his voice gentler than usual. One of the children, seemingly the unofficial leader, stepped forward. "We're sorry for bothering your business, sir," the child said with surprising composure. "We're just trying to sell this." In small hands was a vintage toy car, meticulously preserved despite its age. Daniel knelt down, ignoring the snow soaking into his designer pants. "That's a beautiful model. Why are you selling something so special?" "Our mom needs medicine," another child explained, voice wavering slightly. "She's really sick, and the medicine costs a lot. She works as a nurse, but she can't work now because of her lungs," added a third child. Daniel carefully took the toy car, turning it over in his hands. His heart nearly stopped when he recognized it. A limited edition Morgan Aeromax model, exactly like the one he had gifted to Elizabeth Taylor the night before he walked away from her 10 years ago. "What are your names?" he asked, struggling to keep his voice steady. They introduced themselves one by one. "Riley, Jack, Sam, Noah, and the only girl among them, Emma." "And your mother's name?" Daniel asked, though somehow he already knew the answer. "Elizabeth Taylor," they answered in unison. The toy car nearly slipped from Daniel's suddenly numb fingers. The world around him seemed to blur as memories flooded back. Elizabeth's smile, her determination, the fear in his own heart when she told him she was pregnant, and the cowardice that led him to walk away from what could have been his family. "Sir, are you okay?" one of the children, Noah, asked, concern etching his small face. Daniel looked into 5 faces that suddenly revealed what he'd been too blind to see at first glance. His own eyes looking back at him, Elizabeth's smile, reflections of them both in perfect harmony. "Yes," he managed to say, though nothing would ever be the same again. "I think I'd like to buy this car, and perhaps you could tell me more about your mother." Daniel's heart hammered against his ribs as he led the quintuplets through the showroom toward his private office. Every step felt like walking through a dream, or perhaps a reckoning he'd avoided for a decade. "Your office is bigger than our whole apartment," exclaimed Jack, his eyes wide as they entered the spacious corner suite overlooking the city. "Please make yourselves comfortable." Daniel gestured to the leather sofa that had hosted billionaires and politicians but never children. Certainly never his own children. As the quintuplets settled in, Daniel instructed his assistant to bring hot chocolate and snacks. He needed time to process this earth-shattering revelation while maintaining his composure. "This is the nicest place we've ever been," Sam said, running a hand along the polished mahogany desk. Noah added quietly, "Mom would say we shouldn't touch anything." "It's all right," Daniel assured them, his voice unexpectedly thick with emotion. "Everything here is meant to be used, not just admired." When the hot chocolate arrived, Daniel watched as 5 identical faces lit up at the sight of whipped cream and chocolate sprinkles. He sat across from them, the vintage toy car resting between them like a bridge across 10 years of absence. "So," he began carefully, "you mentioned your mother is ill?" Riley, clearly the protective one, answered with a guarded expression. "She has something wrong with her lungs. The doctors call it pulmonary fibrosis. She can't breathe right anymore." Emma elaborated, her small fingers wrapped tightly around her mug. "She used to run with us in the park, but now she gets tired just walking to the kitchen. And she can't work at the hospital anymore," added Sam, the most analytical of the group. "That's why we don't have money for all her medicines. She says insurance doesn't cover the special ones." Daniel nodded, fighting to maintain his professional demeanor, while his internal world collapsed and reformed with each revelation. "Your mother is a nurse?" "The best nurse in the whole hospital," Jack stated proudly. "Everyone always said so. She helps babies be born." "Labor and delivery," Noah clarified, using the proper terminology in a way that reminded Daniel startlingly of himself at that age. Precise, detail-oriented. Daniel's gaze returned to the toy car. "This is a very special model. Where did you get it?" The quintuplets exchanged glances before Emma spoke up. "It belonged to our dad. It's the only thing we have from him. Mom kept it in a special box," Riley added, a hint of resentment in his young voice. "She said our father gave it to her when they were in college." Daniel felt as though he'd been struck. He remembered giving that exact model to Elizabeth the night of their graduation, the same night she had tentatively brought up their future together, and he had deflected, already planning his escape to pursue his ambitions without complications. "Your father," Daniel began, unsure how to navigate these treacherous waters. "Do you know much about him?" "He wasn't ready to be a dad," Jack recited, as if it were a familiar explanation. "Mom says he had big dreams," Noah added without judgment, "and that having 5 babies at once wasn't in his plans," Sam continued pragmatically. "She never says bad things about him," Emma offered, a glimmer of hope in her eyes that pierced Daniel's heart. "She says maybe someday he'll be ready to meet us." Riley's jaw tightened. "We don't need him. We've been fine with just Mom." Daniel studied their faces. 5 perfect combinations of himself and Elizabeth. How had he not seen it the moment he laid eyes on them? The shape of their eyes, the determined set of their jaws, the analytical intelligence behind their gazes, all reflections of himself and the woman he'd abandoned. "The car is very valuable," Daniel said, his business mind automatically calculating its worth while his newfound father's heart recognized its true value. "I'd like to pay you enough for your mother's medicine. Would that be all right?" The children's faces brightened, though Riley remained suspicious. "How much?" Daniel wrote a figure on a slip of paper that made all 5 children gasp in unison. "That's more than Mom makes in months," Sam exclaimed. "The car is very special," Daniel said, the double meaning heavy in his words. "If you'll allow me, I'd like to drive you home. Perhaps I could speak with your mother about getting her the medical help she needs." As the quintuplets huddled together for a whispered conference, Daniel turned to the window, allowing them privacy while he confronted the magnitude of his discovery. For 10 years he had built an empire of steel and glass while Elizabeth had raised their children alone. The contrast between their lives, his wealth and her struggle, filled him with a shame so profound, it threatened to bring him to his knees. "Okay," Riley finally announced, clearly speaking for the group. "But you have to promise not to make Mom upset. She's too sick to be upset." Daniel looked into 5 pairs of eyes, his eyes, and made a silent vow that would change all their lives forever. "I promise," he said, knowing this was one promise he could never break. As they made their way to his waiting limousine, Daniel watched the children's excitement at the luxury vehicle, their innocence untainted by the adult's complicated past. The toy car sat heavy in his pocket, a reminder of his youthful cowardice and the second chance he never deserved but desperately needed to embrace. The limousine glided through snow-dusted streets, carrying a cargo of secrets and second chances. Daniel watched the quintuplets press their identical faces against the tinted windows, their excitement at the luxury a stark contrast to his internal turmoil. "Look, it has a TV," Jack exclaimed, discovering the entertainment system. "And a mini fridge," Sam added, always observant. Daniel smiled despite himself. "Feel free to explore. There are sodas in there, just this once." Emma turned to him, curiosity brightening her eyes. "Is this really your car? Do you ride in it every day?" "It is," Daniel nodded, "though sometimes I prefer to drive myself." "Mom says people who drive themselves appreciate the journey more," Noah commented quietly. Daniel felt the observation like a physical blow. Elizabeth's wisdom passed to their children while he'd been absent, chasing empty success. "Your mother sounds very wise," he managed. Riley, still guarded, studied Daniel's expression. "Why are you really helping us? Nobody gives this much money for just a toy car." The question hung in the air, direct, unavoidable. Daniel considered his options in the seconds of heavy silence. The truth would change everything, but deception would poison any future relationship before it began. "I believe people should help each other when they can," he answered carefully. "And sometimes, objects hold value beyond their price." Before Riley could press further, the limousine slowed to a stop outside a modest apartment building in a neighborhood that made Daniel's heart ache. This was where his children had grown up, so far from the privilege he'd taken for granted. "We live on the 3rd floor," Emma volunteered. "The elevator's broken again, so we have to use the stairs." "Mom says it keeps us fit," Jack added with a grin. Daniel instructed his driver to wait, then followed the quintuplets into the building. The stairwell was clean but worn, with peeling paint and the scent of too many lives compressed into too little space. By the 3rd floor, Daniel noticed how Noah and Emma had slowed, seemingly accustomed to accommodating someone with breathing difficulties, their mother. At apartment 3C, Riley used a key hanging from a string around his neck to unlock the door. As it swung open, Daniel steeled himself for the reunion he never expected and certainly didn't deserve. The apartment was small but immaculate, with mismatched furniture arranged with care. What struck Daniel most were the photographs, dozens of them covering the walls documenting the growth of 5 identical children from infancy to now, always with Elizabeth centered as their son. "Mom, we're home," Emma called out, "and we brought someone who bought Dad's car." From a doorway appeared Elizabeth Taylor, a shadow of the vibrant woman Daniel had known, yet unmistakably her. Thin to the point of fragility, with an oxygen tube beneath her nose, she looked far older than her 38 years. Her eyes, however, remained the same brilliant blue that had once captivated him across a college lecture hall. Those eyes widened in shock as they locked with Daniel's. Despite her evident attempt to mask her recognition, he saw the moment impact hit her. Anger, hurt, and disbelief washing across her face in rapid succession before she composed herself for the children's sake. "Children," Elizabeth said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the oxygen tube, "why don't you go wash up while I speak with our guest?" As the quintuplets reluctantly filed past her, Elizabeth fixed Daniel with a gaze that contained a decade of unspoken words. "Hello, Elizabeth," Daniel said softly, knowing no words could possibly bridge the chasm between them. "Daniel Morgan," she replied, his name on her lips both familiar and foreign. "I see you've met your children." The moment the children disappeared, down the hallway Elizabeth's carefully maintained composure fractured. "How dare you walk into our lives now?" she whispered fiercely, her voice strained by both emotion and illness. 10 years, Daniel. 10 years of silence. Daniel remained rooted in place, absorbing her justified anger. "I didn't know, Elizabeth. About the quintuplets. I swear I didn't know." Would it have mattered? Her blue eyes, sunken but still fierce, challenged him. "You made your choice when you left. You chose your ambitions over even the possibility of us." A coughing fit seized her then, doubling her over. Daniel instinctively moved to help, but she raised a hand to stop him, struggling to regulate her breathing. "I don't need your help," she managed between labored breaths. "Yes, you do," Daniel replied gently. "Not for my sake. For theirs." Elizabeth straightened, one hand braced against the wall for support. "They've managed just fine without your money. All these years, have they?" Daniel glanced around the modest apartment. It was clean and lovingly maintained, but signs of financial struggle were evident. The worn furniture, patched clothes carefully folded on the sofa, empty medication bottles lined up on the kitchen counter like silent sentinels. "And what about you, Elizabeth? Are you managing just fine?" Before she could answer, Riley appeared in the doorway, his young face tight with concern. "Mom, you shouldn't be standing so long. The doctor said." "I'm fine, sweetheart," Elizabeth interrupted, softening her voice for her son. Daniel watched the interaction with an ache in his chest, the easy love between them, the protectiveness in his son's eyes, a relationship built over years while he'd been absent. "Riley, I need to speak with Mr. Morgan alone. Please check on your siblings." Riley hesitated, glancing suspiciously at Daniel before reluctantly obeying. When they were alone again, Elizabeth sank carefully onto the sofa, her strength visibly waning. "Why are you here, Daniel? What do you want?" "To help," he answered simply. "The children came to my dealership trying to sell a toy car, my graduation gift to you, when they said their mother's name." He paused, the reality still overwhelming. "Elizabeth, you're seriously ill. Let me call my personal physician. So you can ease your conscience?" Her laugh turned into another cough. 10 years too late. "Not for my conscience," Daniel insisted, kneeling before her so they were eye to eye. "For them. For 5 incredible children who deserve to have their mother healthy." Something in his sincerity must have reached her because Elizabeth's shoulders slumped slightly. "Pulmonary fibrosis," she admitted quietly. "Advanced. The specialists say without intensive treatment." She left the sentence unfinished, but its meaning hung heavy between them. "Let me make a call," Daniel urged gently. "Dr. Chen is the best pulmonologist in the state. Just a consultation. You don't have to see me again afterward if that's what you want." Elizabeth studied him, searching for the boy she'd once loved in the successful man before her. "The children can never know who you are, not unless you're planning to stay in their lives permanently. I won't let them experience hope and then abandonment." The ultimatum was clear. Daniel nodded slowly, understanding the weight of the choice before him. "I'll call Dr. Chen," he said, reaching for his phone and stepping toward the window. As he arranged for the emergency house call, Daniel watched the snow falling outside, coating the city in pristine white. Behind him, he could hear the quintuplets. In the kitchen, their voices a symphony of identical tones with distinct personalities already emerging. 5 children he never knew he had. 1 woman he'd never truly forgotten. A family that had existed without him, and now a decision that would define the rest of all their lives. Dr. Rebecca Chen arrived within 30 minutes, her professional demeanor softening slightly at the sight of the quintuplets hovering protectively around their mother. With gentle authority, she convinced them to wait in their bedroom while she examined Elizabeth. Daniel paced the small living room, stealing glances at the family photos adorning the walls. 10 years of birthdays, school events, and ordinary moments all missing his presence. Each image was a testament to Elizabeth's strength and a record of his absence. Mr. Morgan. Noah appeared beside him, studying a photograph Daniel had been examining. That was our 7th birthday. Mom made 5 different cakes because we all like different flavors. Daniel smiled, despite the ache in his chest. Which one was yours? Lemon, Noah answered, his serious expression so reminiscent of Elizabeth's that Daniel felt momentarily disoriented. Everyone thinks it's weird, but I like sour things. I prefer lemon too, Daniel admitted quietly. Another small connection discovered too late. The bedroom door opened, and Dr. Chen emerged with a grave expression. She motioned Daniel toward the kitchen, speaking in hushed tones. The pulmonary fibrosis is significantly advanced. She needs hospitalization immediately for proper assessment and treatment. Without intervention, her prognosis is weeks, not months. Daniel felt the room tilt slightly. Whatever it costs, whatever specialist she needs. It's not just about money, Dr. Chen interrupted gently. She's been managing this condition without adequate care for too long. She admitted she's been rationing her medications to afford the children's school supplies. The revelation struck Daniel like a physical blow. While he'd been amassing wealth, Elizabeth had been sacrificing her health for their children. I've already called for medical transport, Dr. Chen continued, checking her watch. They'll be here in 15 minutes. She'll need to pack essentials. Daniel nodded, moving toward Elizabeth's room with leaden feet. He found her sitting on the edge of her bed, oxygen mask now in place, while Emma carefully folded clothes into a small overnight bag. The ambulance is coming, he said unnecessarily. Elizabeth nodded, then turned to Emma. Sweetheart, could you check if my insurance card is still in my wallet? In my purse by the door. After Emma left, Elizabeth fixed Daniel with an exhausted but determined gaze. The children can't stay alone. I'll arrange everything, Daniel promised. A hotel near the hospital. No, Elizabeth interrupted firmly. They need stability. Their routine, their school. Daniel hesitated before taking the plunge. They could stay at my home. It's only 15 minutes from their school. I have a housekeeper who... Your home? Elizabeth's laugh was hollow. The famous Morgan mansion? 5 children in your perfect orderly world? They're my children too, Elizabeth, Daniel said softly, the words still new and astonishing on his tongue. Before she could respond, the quintuplets appeared in the doorway, 5 identical faces etched with fear. Are you going to the hospital, Mom? Riley demanded, his voice cracking slightly. Elizabeth opened her arms and all 5 children crowded onto the bed beside her. Just for a little while, she assured them. To get the medicine, I need to get better. Who will take care of us? Jack asked, glancing uncertainly at Daniel. Elizabeth met Daniel's eyes over their children's heads, a silent communication loaded with complexity. Mr. Morgan has offered to let you stay at his home while I'm getting better. But we don't even know him, Riley protested. I trust him to keep you safe, Elizabeth said, the words clearly difficult. And it's only temporary. As sirens announced the ambulance's arrival outside, Daniel watched Elizabeth whisper reassurances to each child, her strength remarkable despite her fragility. The ease with which she comforted them highlighted everything he had missed, everything he'd thrown away, years ago. When the paramedics entered with a stretcher, Elizabeth squeezed Daniel's arm as she passed. Don't make promises to them you can't keep, she whispered fiercely. They've never had a father. They've survived without one this long. With those words lingering in the air, Elizabeth was wheeled away, leaving Daniel alone with 5 children, who shared his blood but were complete strangers. Will Mom be okay? Emma asked, her small hand finding his instinctively. Daniel looked down at their entwined fingers, the first touch he'd ever shared with his daughter, and made a silent vow. Yes, he promised. I'll make sure of it. The first 48 hours passed in a blur of hospital corridors, doctors' consultations, and the delicate dance of integrating 5 children into Daniel's carefully ordered life. Elizabeth had been stabilized and moved to a private suite at the city's premier pulmonary center, where specialists developed an aggressive treatment plan to halt the progression of her disease. On the third evening, with the Quintuplets finally settled at his mansion under Mrs. Palmer's watchful eye, Daniel returned to the hospital for the conversation he could no longer postpone. Elizabeth looked marginally better, the supplemental oxygen and proper medications already bringing some color back to her cheeks. She sat propped against pillows, the advanced medical equipment surrounding her bed a stark contrast to the inadequate care she'd been receiving. "How are they?" she asked immediately, before Daniel could even sit down. "Adjusting," he answered, truthfully. "Riley's suspicious of everything. Jack's fascinated by my car collection. Sam's already reorganized my home office filing system. Noah's beaten me twice at chess. And Emma's charmed my entire staff." A ghost of a smile touched Elizabeth's lips. "That sounds like them." The smile faded as she studied him. "This isn't a game, Daniel. These are 5 young lives that have been perfectly stable until now." "Stable but struggling," Daniel countered, gently. "Elizabeth, why didn't you ever tell me? About the pregnancy? About them?" The question hung between them, 10 years overdue. Elizabeth looked away, focusing on the city lights visible through her window. "You made yourself quite clear the night of graduation. Your 10-year plan had no room for commitment, remember? You said you couldn't be weighted down while building your empire." Daniel winced at hearing his own callous words repeated back to him. "I was young and stupid and terrified." "So was I," Elizabeth replied, turning back to him with fierce eyes. "Except I was young, stupid, terrified, and suddenly pregnant with quintuplets. Do you have any idea what that was like? The doctors suggested selective reduction. They warned about complications, about the risk to my health. But you kept them all," Daniel said softly. "Even knowing you'd be alone. They were part of me, part of us even if us no longer existed." She hesitated, vulnerability showing through her strength. "I did try to find you once. About 6 months in, when the reality of raising 5 babies alone truly hit me. Your number was disconnected. You'd moved without a word." Shame washed over Daniel. "I was running. From commitment, from adult responsibility, from how much I actually loved you." Elizabeth's eyes widened slightly at the admission. "I told myself. I was pursuing necessary opportunities," Daniel continued, the confessions pouring out after a decade of suppression. "But the truth is, I was terrified of failing as a partner, as a potential father, so I ensured I'd never have to try." "And now that you've built your empire, are you still terrified?" Daniel met her gaze directly. "Yes, but not of the same things. I'm terrified of the time I've lost, of the damage I've done, of these 5 incredible children, never knowing how much I regret not being there from the beginning." Elizabeth was silent for a long moment. "They ask about you sometimes, their father. I've never lied. I just said you weren't ready for a family when they were born. Thank you for that kindness. I didn't deserve it." "It wasn't for you," Elizabeth clarified. "It was for them. Children shouldn't carry the weight of adults' mistakes." A comfortable silence settled between them, the tension easing slightly. Finally, Daniel asked the question that had been consuming him. "Elizabeth, I want to know them. Really know them. Not just as temporary charges while you're in hospital. I want to be their father, if you'll allow it, and if they'll accept me." Elizabeth studied him, searching for the sincerity behind his words. "They're not a business acquisition, Daniel. You can't just decide to be a father and expect immediate returns. It's messy and exhausting, and often thankless." "I know," he admitted. "I've learned more about that in 3 days than in my entire life, but I want to try. They deserve that much." After a long pause, Elizabeth nodded slowly. "We'll tell them together. Tomorrow. The full truth. Who you are, why you weren't in their lives, and what happens next. But understand this. I won't force them to accept you. Each of them gets to decide what relationship they want with you, if any." Daniel nodded, humbled by her fairness despite everything. "There's something else. The doctors mentioned a treatment, an experimental procedure not covered by insurance. Elizabeth tensed. Daniel, I can't accept. It's not charity, he interrupted, firmly. It's my responsibility. I wasn't there to help for 10 years. Let me do this one thing right. Their eyes held, a decade of hurt, regret, and unresolved feelings passing between them. For the children, Elizabeth finally conceded. For the children, Daniel agreed, though in his heart, it was for all of them, the family he'd abandoned, and now desperately wanted to reclaim. As he left her room, Daniel felt simultaneously lighter and more burdened than ever before. Tomorrow, 5 children would learn he was their father. Tomorrow, he would officially become the one thing his ambition had never prepared him for, a parent responsible for 5 unique lives, with no business strategy or wealth to guide him through the challenges ahead. For the first time in his carefully controlled existence, Daniel Morgan was stepping into completely uncharted territory, with only his heart to lead the way. The morning of truth dawned with ominous gray clouds matching Daniel's turbulent emotions. Mrs. Palmer, his longtime housekeeper, approached him in the kitchen as he stared blankly at his untouched coffee. "Those children are still asleep, Mr. Morgan," she informed him, her initial shock at the quintuplets' arrival now replaced with grudging affection. Poor dears were exhausted after yesterday's hospital visit. Daniel nodded absently, mentally, rehearsing how he would introduce himself as their father. No business negotiation had ever terrified him like this impending conversation. "They're good children," Mrs. Palmer continued, surprising him with her uncharacteristic chattiness. "Well-mannered, despite their circumstances. Their mother raised them right." "Yes, she did," Daniel agreed quietly. "Everything right that I did wrong." A thunderous crash from upstairs interrupted their conversation. Daniel rushed toward the sound, taking the grand staircase 2 steps at a time. He found Jack standing beside a toppled antique vase, surrounded by water and fresh-cut flowers. "I'm sorry," Jack exclaimed, eyes wide with fear. "I was just looking at it, I didn't mean to." "It's all right," Daniel assured him, kneeling to help clean the mess. "It's just a vase." "But it looks expensive," Jack worried, glancing around the opulent hallway. "Everything here is expensive." Daniel smiled gently. "Things can be replaced, people can't." More footsteps announced the arrival of the other children, their identical faces poking out from various doorways with expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion. "Is Jack in trouble?" Noah asked quietly. "Not at all," Daniel answered, noting how they instinctively looked out for each other. "Accidents happen." Riley stepped forward, arms crossed defensively. "At home, we'd have to do extra chores to pay for breaking something." "Well, this is your home now, at least temporarily," Daniel said, the words feeling strange yet right. "And here, we value people over possessions." By mid-morning, after breakfast and helping the children settle, Daniel drove them to the hospital. The atmosphere in the car was tense with unspoken questions. "You seem different from other rich people," Emma observed from the back seat, her perceptive gaze meeting his in the rearview mirror. "How so?" Daniel asked, genuinely curious. "You look sad sometimes," she replied simply, "like you're missing something important." Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel, out of the mouths of babes. At the hospital, they found Elizabeth, sitting up, looking stronger than the day before. Her eyes met Daniel's in silent question. He nodded slightly. It was time. "Children," Elizabeth began once they were all settled around her bed. "There's something important I need to tell you about Mr. Morgan." 5 identical pairs of eyes swiveled between their mother and Daniel. "The truth is," Elizabeth continued, her voice steady despite the magnitude of her words, "Mr. Morgan is your father." The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel felt physically ill under the weight of their stares. "Our father?" Riley finally spoke, disbelief and anger coloring his voice. "The one who left before we were born?" "Yes," Elizabeth answered honestly, We were young, and he wasn't ready for the responsibility of 5 children. But now he is? Jack asked, confusion evident in his furrowed brow. Daniel cleared his throat. I made a terrible mistake leaving your mother, leaving all of you. I didn't know about you specifically, but that's no excuse. I should have been there. The quintuplets' reactions were as varied as their personalities despite their identical appearances. Riley's face hardened with rejection. Jack looked thoughtfully curious. Sam analyzed Daniel with newfound interest. Noah retreated into silence. And Emma, sweet Emma, looked cautiously hopeful. So what happens now? Sam asked pragmatically. Daniel exchanged glances with Elizabeth before answering. That depends partly on what you all want. I'd like to get to know each of you if you'll let me, but I understand if you need time. Do we have to call you Dad? Riley challenged, the word sounding like an accusation. No, Daniel replied honestly. You can call me whatever makes you comfortable. I haven't earned Dad yet. As the conversation continued, with questions and tentative answers, Daniel realized this was just the beginning of the hardest challenge he'd ever faced. Earning the trust of 5 children he'd unintentionally abandoned and rebuilding a family from the fragments of his greatest mistake. 2 weeks into their new living arrangement, Daniel found himself navigating unfamiliar territory, not just fatherhood, but the complex world of 5 distinct personalities housed in identical bodies. The mansion that had once echoed with emptiness now overflowed with noise, chaos, and unexpected moments of connection. This particular Saturday morning, Daniel discovered Jack in the garage, reverently examining the vintage Aston Martin that Daniel rarely drove. She's beautiful, Jack whispered, not touching but hovering his hands over the sleek curves. Would you like to see the engine? Daniel offered. Jack's eyes widened. Can I really? As Daniel lifted the hood, he was surprised by Jack's knowledgeable questions. How do you know so much about cars at your age? Jack shrugged. I just like figuring out how things work. Mom got me some library books on engines when I was 7. Daniel felt a surge of pride mixed with regret for all he'd missed. I was the same way as a kid. My father thought I was wasting time with car magazines, but they inspired me to start Morgan Motors. They worked side by side, Daniel explaining the engine components while Jack absorbed everything with remarkable comprehension. For the first time, Daniel didn't feel like an outsider with one of his children. Later that afternoon, he found Sam in his home office, methodically organizing a stack of financial reports. Mrs. Palmer said these needed filing, Sam explained, not looking up. Your system wasn't very efficient, Daniel fought a smile. And what system would you recommend? Without hesitation, Sam launched into a detailed explanation of categorical versus chronological filing benefits that left Daniel astonished at the business acumen in his 10-year-old son. You know, Daniel said carefully, I started my first business venture at 11, selling custom car detailing to neighbors. Sam finally looked up, interest sparked. Did it make money? Enough to invest in my next idea. Daniel paused. Would you like to see how Morgan Motors handles its quarterly projections? Sam's typically serious face broke into a genuine smile. That evening, Daniel discovered Noah in the library, absorbed in the antique chess set displayed on a side table. Do you play? Daniel asked. Noah nodded. Mom taught me. She's really good. Would you like a game? Daniel offered, already setting up the pieces. Their match revealed Noah's strategic thinking and patient approach, so similar to Daniel's own style that it was uncanny. When Noah executed a perfect queen sacrifice to secure checkmate, Daniel stared in disbelief. Where did you learn that move? I just saw it, Noah shrugged. 3 moves ahead. During a thunderstorm that night, Daniel was awakened by a small knock on his bedroom door. Emma stood in the hallway, clutching a worn teddy bear, her face pale. I don't like storms, she whispered. They're too loud. I understand, Daniel said gently, leading her to the window seat. I was afraid of them too, as a boy. You were? Emma asked skeptically. Terrified, he admitted. My grandmother taught me to count seconds between lightning and thunder to know how far away the storm is. Together, they counted after each flash, Emma gradually relaxing against his shoulder. In the soft lamplight, Her profile was so like Elizabeth's that Daniel's heart constricted. "Are you really our father?" Emma asked suddenly, her directness catching him off guard. Daniel hesitated, knowing this moment demanded complete honesty. "Yes, I am." "Then why weren't you there? For birthdays and school plays and when we were sick?" The simple question carried the weight of all his failures. "Because I made the biggest mistake of my life," he answered truthfully. "I was afraid and selfish, and I missed everything that truly mattered." Emma considered this with surprising maturity. "Mom says everyone deserves a second chance if they're truly sorry. Your mother is a wiser person than I've ever been," Daniel replied softly. Only Riley remained distant, watching Daniel's growing connections with his siblings with suspicious eyes. Each overture Daniel made was met with cold resistance, a constant reminder that trust once broken couldn't be repaired with wealth or good intentions. That night, after tucking Emma back into bed, Daniel stood in the hallway looking at 5 bedroom doors, each containing a piece of his heart he hadn't known was missing until now. Behind each door slept a child who shared his blood but had grown up without him. 4 were beginning to open their lives to him, while the 5th remained a fortress of justified resentment. It wasn't enough to be their father in name, Daniel realized. He needed to become the father they deserved, even if that journey took the rest of his life. Elizabeth's health had stabilized enough for a supervised day visit to the Morgan mansion. Daniel spent the morning in uncharacteristic nervousness, directing staff to prepare her favorite tea and ensure the house was perfectly welcoming. "You've rearranged the living room," Elizabeth noted upon arrival, oxygen tank trailing beside her as she took in the transformation of his formerly minimalist space. Children's books now mingled with business journals on the shelves and framed artwork, clearly the Quintuplets' creations, adorned walls once reserved for abstract paintings. The children needed space to be themselves, Daniel explained, helping her to the most comfortable chair. "I needed that too, I think." While the Quintuplets excitedly showed their mother around their temporary home, Daniel observed the easy love between them with a mixture of admiration and envy. Elizabeth had created this family without him. He was still learning how to belong within it. After lunch, with Elizabeth's quiet approval, Daniel gathered everyone in the living room. The weight of the moment settled over him as 5 identical children and their mother looked at him expectantly. "I've asked you here because there's something important we need to discuss," Daniel began, his usual corporate confidence absent. "Your mother and I have talked about this, and we believe it's time to answer any questions you might have about our family." Riley's eyebrows shot up. "Our family?" "Yes." Daniel nodded, meeting each child's gaze. "About why I wasn't in your lives until now, and what happens going forward." Emma, perceptive as always, asked the question hovering in the air. "Are you going to be our dad now? For real?" Daniel looked to Elizabeth, who nodded encouragingly despite the complexity in her eyes. "I would like that very much," Daniel answered, honestly. "But that depends on each of you. I wasn't there when you were born or for your first steps or first days of school. I missed 10 years I can never get back, and I have no right to demand you accept me now." "Why did you leave Mom?" Jack asked directly. Daniel took a deep breath. "Because I was a coward. I had dreams of building a business empire, and I convinced myself I couldn't do that and be a good partner to your mother." He swallowed hard. "When we were together in college, I already had plans to leave after graduation. Then when your mother told me she was pregnant, though she didn't know yet it was with quintuplets, I panicked and left even sooner." "That's horrible," Riley stated flatly. "Yes, it was," Daniel agreed, not defending himself. "It was the worst decision of my life." "If you hadn't seen us at your car place, would you ever have tried to find us?" Sam asked, analytical as always. "Don't know," Daniel admitted. The difficult truth was better than a comforting lie. I told myself I was happy with my success, but something was always missing: meeting you all. It was like finding pieces of myself I never knew were lost. The room fell silent as the quintuplets processed this revelation. Daniel watched their identical faces reveal entirely different emotions. Riley's anger, Jack's curiosity, Sam's careful analysis, Noah's quiet hurt, and Emma's cautious hope. "What happens now?" Noah finally asked, his soft voice breaking the silence. Elizabeth leaned forward slightly. "That's partly for all of us to decide together. While I'm getting better, you'll continue staying here with Mr. Morgan. But beyond that, we need to figure out what our family looks like going forward." "Can I still call you Daniel?" Riley challenged, arms crossed defensively. "You can call me whatever makes you comfortable," Daniel assured him. "I think I'd like to try calling you Dad," Emma said quietly. "I've always wondered what it would feel like to say that to someone." Daniel felt his heart constrict as the simple word hung in the air, a title he'd done nothing to earn, but desperately wanted to deserve. "This is weird," Jack declared with 10-year-old bluntness. "Yesterday you were just some rich guy who bought our toy car. Now you're our father." "It is weird," Daniel agreed with a small smile. "For me too." "Will you move into our apartment when Mom gets better?" Sam asked practically. Daniel glanced at Elizabeth, seeing his own uncertainty mirrored in her eyes. "We haven't figured everything out yet," he answered truthfully. "But I promise you this, whatever happens, I'm not disappearing from your lives again." As the conversation continued, with questions answered honestly and boundaries respectfully established, Daniel realized they weren't just 5 children getting to know their father. They were 6 strangers becoming a family, with all the messiness, uncertainty, and hope that entailed. In the weeks that followed, Daniel systematically rearranged his life around his newfound family. Board meetings were rescheduled, business trips delegated, and for the first time in his career, Daniel Morgan left the office at 5 p.m. sharp each day. "Sir, the Tokyo investors are requesting a video conference," his assistant reminded him. One afternoon, Daniel checked his watch, 4:30 p.m. "Schedule it for tomorrow morning. I promised Jack I'd take him to the manufacturing plant today." His executive team watched this transformation with varying degrees of surprise and adjustment. The driven CEO, who once worked 18-hour days, was now rushing out to attend elementary school science fairs and impromptu chess tournaments. With each child, Daniel sought individual connections that honored their unique personalities despite their identical appearances. For Jack, it was the promised tour of the Morgan Motors manufacturing floor. Daniel watched his son's eyes widen at the sight of partially assembled luxury vehicles, expert craftsmen fitting handmade parts with precision. "This is amazing," Jack whispered, running a reverent hand along a leather interior. "You make all these?" "Our team does," Daniel corrected. "Every car is built by skilled people who take pride in their work." "Could I build cars someday?" Jack asked hesitantly. Daniel felt an unexpected lump in his throat. "If that's what you love, I'd be honored to have you here. But only if it's your dream, not mine." For Sam, Daniel arranged a special project, helping to prepare a presentation for a children's charity Morgan Motors supported. Together they created charts and graphs, Daniel patiently explaining financial concepts while Sam absorbed everything with remarkable comprehension. "Mom says I'm too focused on money sometimes," Sam confessed while calculating donation percentages. "Money is just a tool," Daniel explained. "I learned that too late. What matters is how you use it to help others." Noah's reserved nature made connection more challenging until Daniel discovered their shared love of strategy games extended beyond chess. They spent rainy afternoons exploring classic board games from Daniel's childhood collection, conversations flowing more easily across a game board. "You let me win that round," Noah accused after a particularly close game of backgammon. Daniel shook his head, genuinely surprised. "I never let anyone win. You outplayed me fair and square." The small smile that crossed Noah's face was worth more than any business victory Daniel had ever achieved. With Emma, connections came most naturally. Her openness and curiosity drew Daniel into her world of stories and imagination. When she mentioned her mother had never had time to teach her to ride a bicycle, Daniel immediately purchased 5 identical bikes in different colors. "I'm scared," Emma admitted, balanced precariously on her pink bicycle as Daniel held it steady. "That's okay," he assured her. "I'll hold on until you're ready for me to let go." "Promise?" she asked, her trust both precious and terrifying. "Promise," Daniel replied, realizing the words applied to far more than just bicycle lessons. Only Riley remained distant, watching these developing relationships with guarded eyes. Daniel's careful overtures were met with monosyllabic responses or outright rejection. "He needs more time," Elizabeth advised during one of Daniel's daily hospital visits. Her health was improving steadily, the specialized treatments showing promising results. "Riley's been the protector since they were toddlers. He took on that role when you weren't there." "I don't know how to reach him," Daniel admitted. Elizabeth's gaze softened. "Just keep trying. Consistency matters more than grand gestures." Taking her advice, Daniel maintained steady, patient efforts with Riley, never pushing but always inviting. The breakthrough came unexpectedly during a parent-teacher conference when Riley's teacher praised his exceptional writing skills. "He has a remarkable talent for storytelling," the teacher explained. His essay about family was particularly moving. Later that evening, Daniel hesitantly approached Riley's room. "Your teacher mentioned your writing. I'd love to read something, if you'd share it." Daniel expected rejection, but was met instead with a contemplative look. After a moment, Riley retrieved a notebook from his desk and handed it over without comment. That night, Daniel read stories that revealed his son's inner world, tales of bravery, protection, and fierce love for siblings and a mother who fought impossible odds. Between the lines, Daniel recognized Riley's unspoken fear that this newfound father might disappear again, leaving more damage than before. The following morning, Daniel left a note on Riley's desk. "Your stories show a heart and wisdom beyond your years. Thank you for sharing them with me. I'm listening now, even to the things you don't say out loud." It wasn't forgiveness or acceptance, but when Riley nodded briefly at breakfast, Daniel recognized it for what it was, the first fragile foundation of a bridge being built between them. The call came at 3:17 a.m., a clinical voice informing Daniel that Elizabeth had been rushed to intensive care after a severe breathing episode. Her lungs were failing faster than the treatments could work. "I'll be right there," Daniel promised, heart racing as he hung up. He found Mrs. Palmer already in the hallway, alerted by the late-night commotion. "The children," he began. "I'll watch over them," she assured him. "Go to her." The hospital corridors seemed endless as Daniel rushed toward the ICU. The specialist met him outside Elizabeth's room, expression grave behind his surgical mask. "Her condition has deteriorated rapidly," he explained. "We need to perform emergency surgery to buy her time while we reassess treatment options." "Do whatever it takes," Daniel insisted. "Cost is no object." "It's not about money, Mr. Morgan. It's about her strength to withstand the procedure." Daniel peered through the window at Elizabeth, so small among the machines keeping her alive, yet still fighting. The woman who had raised their 5 children alone would not surrender easily. "She's the strongest person I've ever known," Daniel said quietly. "She'll make it." Morning brought the impossible task of explaining to 5 children why their mother might not come home. "Is Mom going to die?" Emma asked directly, her small voice cracking. Daniel gathered them in the living room, determined to be honest without destroying hope. "The doctors are doing everything possible," he answered carefully. "She's very sick, but she's also very strong. We should be with her," Riley insisted, eyes red-rimmed but fierce. "We will be," Daniel promised. After her surgery this afternoon, the hours of waiting tested them all. Daniel canceled every meeting without explanation, his entire focus on 5 terrified children and the woman fighting for her life. In the sterile hospital waiting room, the quintuplets huddled together on uncomfortable chairs, their usual energy replaced by silent fear. Daniel paced, stopping occasionally to check on each child, offering comfort that felt inadequate against their potential loss. Unexpectedly, Riley moved to stand beside him at the window. "She can't die," he stated flatly. "We need her." Daniel turned, seeing not anger but raw fear in his son's eyes. "I know." "You don't know," Riley countered, voice trembling. "You weren't there when she taught us to read, or when she worked double shifts to buy us Christmas presents, or when she sang 5 different lullabies every night because we each needed our own." Daniel didn't defend himself. "You're right. I missed everything." Riley's composure cracked slightly. If she doesn't... He couldn't finish the terrible thought. Without thinking, Daniel placed a hand on Riley's shoulder. To his surprise, Riley didn't pull away. "Your mother and I met in college," Daniel said softly. "She was studying nursing while I was in business. She was the smartest person in every room, but never made anyone feel small for not knowing something." Other children gathered closer, hungry for stories of their mother from someone who had known her before they existed. "She could out-argue any professor," Daniel continued, memories flooding back. "And she volunteered at the campus clinic even with her full course load." "That sounds like Mom," Jack nodded, wiping away tears. "She always wanted to help people," Daniel agreed. "I was the opposite, focused entirely on my ambitions. But somehow she saw something worthwhile in me anyway." Hours passed with Daniel sharing gentle stories, the quintuplets occasionally offering their own. Their shared love for Elizabeth temporarily bridged the gaps between them. When the surgeon finally appeared, they stood as one family, breaths held collectively. "She made it through surgery," he announced. "It was touch and go, but she's stabilized. Her recovery will be lengthy, but the procedure was successful." The tension broke like a wave, relief flooding the small waiting room. The quintuplets embraced each other while Daniel stepped aside, overwhelming gratitude weakening his knees. Later, when they were allowed to see Elizabeth briefly, each child approached her bedside with whispered words and gentle touches. Daniel hung back, watching the love between mother and children with renewed awe. As they left, Riley paused beside him. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" Daniel asked, surprised. Riley shrugged, emotion making him awkward. "For making sure she got the best doctors. For telling us stories about before. For not leaving when it got scary." It was the first time Riley had acknowledged any positive action from Daniel, a tiny opening in the wall between them. "I'm not leaving again," Daniel promised. "Not ever." With Elizabeth's condition finally stabilized but recovery uncertain, Daniel found himself at a crossroads. The empire he'd built, once the center of his universe, now seemed hollow compared to the 5 lives that depended on him and the woman fighting to rejoin them. 1 month after Elizabeth's surgery, Daniel called an emergency board meeting at Morgan Motors. "I'm restructuring my role effective immediately," he announced to his stunned executives. "I'll be working remotely 3 days per week and delegating daily operations to the executive team." His CFO leaned forward. "Daniel, the Tokyo expansion requires your personal attention. The shareholders will understand that some things matter more than quarterly profits," Daniel interrupted firmly. "My family needs me." The word family, once foreign to his vocabulary, now defined his every decision. At home, Daniel supervised the renovation of the mansion's east wing, creating a space where Elizabeth could recover in comfort once discharged. Medical equipment was disguised within elegant designs, creating a sanctuary rather than a sick room. "These rooms get the morning sunlight," he explained to the interior designer. Elizabeth always said mornings were precious, full of possibilities. Each day found Daniel balancing hospital visits, children's school activities, and remote work with newfound determination. His executive assistant adjusted to receiving important emails at midnight, after 5 children were finally asleep. "You've changed," Elizabeth observed during one of his daily visits. Her voice was stronger, though she remained dependent on oxygen. "The Daniel I knew would never have abandoned a major project for school science fair. I'm trying to become someone better than I was," he admitted, adjusting her pillows. Someone worthy of you. Of them. Elizabeth studied him thoughtfully. This isn't temporary, is it? Not just until I'm better? No, Daniel replied simply. This is who I should have been all along. At home, subtle changes marked his transformation. Business magazines disappeared from his nightstand, replaced by parenting books. His immaculate home office now featured children's artwork pinned alongside financial reports. Staff who had once feared his perfectionism witnessed their employer laughing during impromptu living room dance parties led by Emma. The most profound change came one evening when Daniel discovered Riley in the study, holding the vintage toy car, the Morgan Aeromax that had brought them together. I thought you sold this, Daniel said carefully, approaching his most distant child. You bought it, but you gave it back, Riley replied, examining the detailed craftsmanship. Mom kept it all these years because she said it was important. Daniel sat nearby, giving Riley space. It was my graduation gift to her, before I made the biggest mistake of my life. Riley was silent for a long moment. Did you ever think about us? Even not knowing there were 5 of us? I thought about your mother, Daniel answered honestly. I told myself I'd made the right choice, but there were nights I couldn't sleep, wondering about the life I'd abandoned. But you were successful, Riley pointed out. You got everything you wanted. Daniel shook his head. I got everything I thought I wanted. There's a difference. The following day, Daniel had the toy car professionally restored and placed in a custom display case in the living room's most prominent location. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "Second chances begin with recognizing first mistakes." During Elizabeth's next weekend visit home, now strong enough for supervised day trips from the hospital, she noticed the display immediately. You kept it all these years, Daniel said, watching her expression. It was the only piece of you they had, Elizabeth replied softly. Even when I was angriest at you, I couldn't take that away from them. That night, after the children were asleep and before Elizabeth returned to the hospital, Daniel found the courage to speak words he'd held back. I've been afraid to say this, he began, sitting beside her wheelchair in the garden. Because I haven't earned the right. But these weeks have shown me what truly matters. Elizabeth waited, her eyes reflecting starlight and hard-won wisdom. I wasted years chasing hollow success, Daniel continued, when I could have been building something real with you, with our family. And now? Elizabeth asked quietly. Now, I know what I want, Daniel answered. A second chance I don't deserve but will spend my life trying to earn. Spring arrived, bringing renewal to more than just the gardens surrounding the Morgan mansion. After months of intensive treatment, Elizabeth was finally discharged from the hospital. Though still requiring oxygen and daily therapy, she had defied the grimmest predictions of her specialists. Welcome home, Daniel said simply as he wheeled her through the front door of what had once been exclusively his domain, but now unmistakably belonged to all of them. Evidence of the children's presence greeted Elizabeth everywhere. Artwork taped to the refrigerator, school books scattered across tables, bicycles parked haphazardly by the garden entrance. The formal elegance Daniel had once insisted upon had yielded to lived-in warmth. I hardly recognize this place, Elizabeth marveled, taking in the transformation. It was never really a home before, Daniel admitted, just a showcase. The East Wing renovation had created a suite where Elizabeth could regain her strength while remaining part of daily family life. Her medical equipment had been thoughtfully integrated into beautiful surroundings, the hospital bed replaced with a specially designed alternative that looked like a normal bedroom set. You thought of everything, Elizabeth said softly as she explored the space. The children helped design it, Daniel explained. Emma insisted on the window seat. Noah chose the bookshelf arrangement. Sam researched the best lighting for recovery. And the family photos? Elizabeth asked, noticing the careful chronology of images showing the quintuplets from infancy to present day. Riley's idea, Daniel answered, still somewhat awed by that particular breakthrough. He said you should be surrounded by our history, even the parts I missed. Adjusting to their new family dynamic brought daily challenges and discoveries. Household staff who had once served a solitary, demanding businessman now found themselves part of an extended family. Mrs. Palmer, initially scandalized by 5 rambunctious children disrupting her immaculate domain, had become their fiercest advocate. "Those children need another serving of vegetables, Mr. Morgan," she'd insist at dinner. Or, "Master Noah's chess tournament is Thursday afternoon. I've already rescheduled your conference call." Daniel welcomed these intrusions into his formerly rigid schedule. His executive team gradually adapted to their CEO joining video meetings, with bedtime stories visibly waiting on his desk, or occasionally having a child wander into frame with an urgent question about homework. One evening, Daniel returned from the office to find his formerly sterile living room transformed into a fort city. Blankets suspended from furniture creating an elaborate playground where all 5 children disappeared and reappeared through hidden passages. His old self would have seen chaos and disorder. Now he saw joy. "Come see what we built," Emma called, waving him toward a blanket entrance. Daniel didn't hesitate, dropping to his knees to crawl through the narrow opening, his expensive suit collecting dust as he navigated the labyrinth his children had created. In the fort's central chamber, he found Elizabeth resting against pillows, supervising the architectural marvel with evident delight. "The CEO of Morgan Motors crawling through blanket tunnels," she teased. "Your board would be shocked." "Let them be," Daniel replied, settling beside her. "This is more important." The quintuplets' voices echoed around them, their identical appearances, now so distinct to Daniel that he could identify each child by the smallest mannerism. Riley's determined chin tilt, Jack's excited hand gestures, Sam's analytical head tilt, Noah's thoughtful pauses, Emma's expressive eyebrows. Later that evening, after the fort city had been reluctantly dismantled and the children sent to bed, Daniel found Riley in the study, staring at the restored toy car in its display case. "I remember when Mom first showed us this," Riley said without turning. "She said it was special because it was given with love, even if that love got lost along the way." Daniel stood beside his son, both reflected in the display case glass, their profiles startlingly similar. "Your mother has always been wiser than me." Riley nodded, then surprised Daniel by asking, "Would you help with my writing assignment tomorrow? It's about defining family." "I would be honored," Daniel replied, recognizing the olive branch for what it was. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps its beginning. As he made his final rounds checking on each sleeping child, Daniel realized the mansion's corridors no longer echoed with emptiness. Every room held breath, dreams, and possibilities, the messy, beautiful reality of the family he'd nearly lost forever. Summer painted the Morgan estate in vibrant colors, mirroring the renewal flourishing within its walls. 3 months after Elizabeth's homecoming, her strength had improved enough that oxygen was needed only at night. The quintuplets, now settled into their new reality, had completed their school year with Daniel attending every end-of-term event, from Jack's science fair to Riley's writing competition. What began as an emergency arrangement had evolved into something none of them had anticipated: a family. One morning, Daniel found Elizabeth on the garden terrace watching the children splash in the swimming pool, a feature installed at Jack's persistent request. "The doctor called with my latest results," Elizabeth said as Daniel joined her. "My lungs have stabilized beyond their expectations, not healed completely, but you're going to be all right," Daniel finished, relief washing through him. The fear of losing her again had shadowed even their brightest moments. Elizabeth nodded, smiling as Emma performed an elaborate dive for her siblings' approval. "They've changed so much these past months, especially Riley." Daniel followed her gaze to where their most resistant child was now teaching Noah a swimming technique, his natural leadership channeled into protection rather than defensiveness. "He still keeps me on my toes," Daniel admitted, "but last week, he asked if I would coach his debate team next year." "And will you?" "I've already rearranged my entire executive schedule," Daniel confirmed. "Some things aren't negotiable anymore." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that had gradually replaced the tension of their early reunification. Daniel found himself studying Elizabeth's profile, The strength and grace that had captivated him in college now tempered by a decade of challenges he'd left her to face alone. "I've been thinking," Elizabeth said suddenly, "about our living arrangement." Daniel tensed. Since her discharge, neither had addressed the impermanence of their situation, the fact that technically, Elizabeth and the children were guests in his home during her recovery. "The apartment lease expires next month," she continued, "and the children are settled in school here now. You could stay," Daniel offered immediately. "All of you, for as long as you want." Elizabeth turned to face him directly. "Is that what you want, Daniel? A permanent house guest situation?" The question held layers of unspoken meaning. They had carefully navigated co-parenting while rebuilding trust, but the nature of their personal relationship remained undefined, a delicate territory neither had been brave enough to explore. Daniel took a breath, recognizing the crossroads before them. "I'd like to talk about that. Maybe somewhere private?" Their opportunity came that weekend with a family picnic planned at the estate's meadow. While the quintuplets raced through the grass flying kites Daniel had helped them build, he asked Elizabeth to walk with him to the small lake beyond the trees. "I remember how you loved being near water," he said as they found a quiet spot beneath a willow tree. "You remember that after 10 years? Elizabeth asked, surprised. "I remember everything about you," Daniel admitted, "even when I tried not to." The afternoon sunlight filtered through the branches, dappling Elizabeth's face with gentle patterns. Daniel found himself as nervous as the college sophomore who had first asked her to coffee 2 decades earlier. "These months with you and the children," he began carefully, "have given me everything I never knew I needed. The company, the success, the wealth. None of it meant anything without someone to share it with." Elizabeth watched him steadily, neither encouraging nor discouraging his words. "I know I have no right to ask for more than your forgiveness," Daniel continued, "but I find myself hoping for something I never deserved to reclaim." "And what's that?" Elizabeth asked softly. "A chance to rebuild what my cowardice destroyed, not just as co-parents but as partners." Daniel's voice grew steadier as he spoke his truth. "I never stopped loving you, Elizabeth. Even when I convinced myself my ambitions were more important." Elizabeth's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I protected myself from those feelings for a very long time, for the children's sake. And now I see a different man than they. One who left," she acknowledged. "But trust isn't rebuilt overnight, Daniel." "I'm not asking for overnight," he clarified. "I'm asking for a beginning. Small steps. Dinner, just the two of us. Conversations that aren't only about the children. A chance to know each other again." Elizabeth considered his words, her expression thoughtful. "Small steps," she finally agreed. "We owe it to ourselves, and the children, to explore if there's still something worth rebuilding." From the meadow beyond, they heard the children's laughter, 5 voices united in joyful abandon, their shared creation despite all odds. "Small steps," Daniel repeated, offering his hand. When Elizabeth's fingers intertwined with his, it felt like coming home to a place he'd foolishly abandoned, but had finally found his way back to, older, wiser, and infinitely more grateful for. The second chance he'd been given. 1 year later, the Morgan estate bloomed with white roses and silver ribbons, transformed for a celebration none could have imagined during those desperate days when 5 determined children had attempted to sell a toy car to save their mother. In the grand garden where the quintuplets had once splashed in a newly installed pool, chairs were arranged in semicircles. At the center stood an elegant arch entwined with flowers, the vintage toy car, the catalyst for their reunification, displayed prominently on a small pedestal beside it. "Are you nervous?" Jack asked, adjusting his bow tie as he stood with his siblings and Daniel in the library. "Terrified," Daniel admitted with a smile. "In the best possible way." The past year had unfolded like a healing story, with Elizabeth's health steadily improving and their relationship cautiously blossoming from tentative dinners to deeper reconnection. Small steps had gradually led to a path they now walked together. "I still can't believe Mom said yes," Sam remarked pragmatically. I can, Emma countered, radiant in her flower girl dress. She smiles differently when you're around now, she told Daniel. Noah, observant as always, added quietly, You both do. Only Riley remained silent, his expression unreadable as he straightened his jacket. Of all the children, his journey to acceptance had been longest, his forgiveness hardest earned. Riley, Daniel said gently, I know today changes things officially, but I want you to know. I know, Riley interrupted, meeting Daniel's gaze directly. The defensiveness that had once characterized his every interaction had softened into something more complex. Not blind acceptance, but measured trust. Mom deserves to be happy. We all do. The simple statement carried the weight of a benediction. The clock struck 4. The quintuplets took their positions. Though they'd initially resisted the idea of being 11-year-old groomsmen and a bridesmaid, they'd ultimately embraced their roles in cementing their parents' reunion. Daniel stood beneath the flower arch, watching as his children, no longer strangers but extensions of his heart, took their places beside him. The small gathering of guests included hospital staff who'd fought for Elizabeth's recovery, teachers who'd supported the quintuplets through their transition, and colleagues who'd witnessed Daniel's transformation from driven CEO to devoted father. When the music changed and Elizabeth appeared on the garden path, Daniel felt time collapse around them. She wore not white, but a dress the color of sunrise, her once fragile frame now strong enough to walk unassisted. Though an oxygen tank remained, discreetly positioned near her seat for later, this moment belonged solely to her strength. Their vows were simple, but profound, acknowledging both the youthful love they'd shared and the mature bond they'd reconstructed from its ruins. 10 years ago, I made a choice born of fear, Daniel stated, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. Today, I make a different choice, one born of gratitude, respect, and love that has weathered separation and found its way home. Elizabeth's response held equal parts forgiveness and promise. Our path was never straight, but it led us here, wiser, stronger, and surrounded by the 5 miracles who kept a piece of you alive in my heart, even when I thought that heart was closed forever. As they exchanged rings, Emma stepped forward, with the restored toy car, placing it in their joined hands, a symbol of what had been broken and made whole again. The quintuplets' cheers were loudest when the ceremony concluded, 5 identical voices united in celebration of their officially completed family. Later, as twilight painted the sky in shades of possibility, Elizabeth found Daniel watching their children lead the other young guests in an impromptu dance competition. Having regrets yet? She teased, leaning comfortably against his shoulder. Only about the decade we lost, he answered honestly. Never about finding my way back to you. To all of you. Elizabeth's gaze followed his to where Riley was uncharacteristically letting Jack teach him a ridiculous dance move, his serious face transformed by laughter. Some things have to break before they can be rebuilt stronger, she observed, squeezing Daniel's hand. Even us. As night settled over the Morgan estate, no longer a showcase but a true home, the family that had begun with abandonment and continued through struggle celebrated not just a marriage but a restoration. The circle that had been broken 10 years earlier was finally complete, proving that while time could not be reclaimed, second chances could create something even more precious from the fragments of first mistakes. In the garden where 5 determined children had once doubted his intentions, Daniel Morgan had finally found the success that mattered most, not in wealth or achievement, but in the love of the family he'd nearly lost, but had been given the grace to reclaim.